All right, let's dive in. Today, we're getting organized, like really organized,
Right
but
on.
not just your junk drawer. We're talking about your brain.
Sounds intense.
We're using this book, The Organized Mind by Daniel J. Levitin. We'll learn some cool facts about how our brains work,
Okay.
and then we'll figure out how to beat information overload, so we can actually get stuff done.
Sounds good to me.
Ready to upgrade your mental OS.
Let's do it.
So this Levitin guy, he starts with this idea. Our brains are still basically stuck in hunter-gatherer mode.
It's true. Like we haven't evolved to keep up with modern life.
Like trying to run the latest software on an old computer.
Yeah, exactly.
So how does this caveman brain deal with the internet, with social media, with like a zillion emails?
Right. Well, Levin compares it to the amount of stuff we have nowadays.
Okay.
Like the average person has way more possessions than our hunter-gatherer ancestors, thousands of times more.
Wow.
And that's a lot to deal with, even if it's not all physical clutter.
Makes sense. It's like information clutter.
Right.
But hold on. Didn't people freak out when writing was invented too?
Totally.
Wasn't that like the first information overload?
Oh, yeah. Like Plato was worried people would become forgetful
Really?
because they wouldn't have to rely on their memory as much.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like just shows that we always get a bit anxious about new technology.
True. So are we doomed then? Are we all just going to be like slaves to this information overload?
No, not at all. Levitin talks about using external systems.
Okay.
Things like calendars, to-do lists, even your phone's notepad.
So these are like brain extenders.
Yeah, exactly. Think of it as an assistant for your mind.
Oh, I love that. So instead of trying to remember everything, we can use these tools to help us like outsource our memories.
Exactly. And it all makes sense when you think about how our brains work.
Right.
Levitin, he goes into the whole cognitive psychology of attention and memory.
Okay.
He says we have this attentional filter.
What's that?
It helps us focus on what matters and block out distractions.
I need one of those.
Right. It's like your brain's spam filter.
Okay.
Only lets the important stuff through.
That makes sense. But how does this filter thing actually work?
Well, it's pretty complex. A lot of different parts of the brain and chemicals are involved.
Okay.
But the main takeaway is that our brains can only focus on so much at once.
Right.
So to really concentrate, we have to minimize distractions.
So maybe turn off those notifications, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
What about memory? How does that fit into all of this?
Well, Levitin, he says our brains, they're really good at connecting similar events together,
Okay.
which is why it's harder to remember, like, routine things.
Oh, I see.
Can you remember what you had for breakfast 2 Thursdays ago?
Probably not, unless it was something really unusual.
Right. Like, I don't know, pizza for breakfast or something.
Uh-huh, yeah. That I'd remember.
Exactly. And this is where it gets interesting. Every time we recall a memory, we can actually change it.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, it's called memory reconsolidation. So our current mood can actually affect how we remember things.
So our memories aren't set in stone.
Nope. It's almost like our brains are constantly rewriting our history.
That's kind of freaky.
It is. And it shows how important it is to understand how our memory works.
Yeah, for sure.
So Levitin argues that instead of cramming everything in our heads, we should use external systems.
Okay, so those calendars and lists we talked about.
Exactly. To help us remember things and organize information.
Okay, but where do we even start? Do we need like color-coded folders and a fancy filing system?
Not really. Levitin, he suggests something super simple. 3x5 index cards.
Seriously, index cards. I've used those since like elementary school.
I know, right? But they're super powerful.
Okay, I'm willing to give index cards another shot. But why are they so great?
Well, they're simple, right, and flexible. Plus, our brains love to categorize things. It's kind of natural for us.
Okay, so I could have a stack for work stuff, one for personal to-dos, maybe one for random ideas.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're making all the different parts of your brain visible.
I like that.
Right.
And I bet it feels way better than checking off a digital list.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a physical thing, writing it down.
Yeah.
And then moving the card when you're done. Like, it uses your visual memory, too.
Oh, that makes sense. Like, we remember where we saw something easier than we remember the thing itself.
Yeah.
Like putting that empty milk carton on your car seat to remind you to stop at the store.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's so simple, but it works.
It does. And Levitin, he has this rule. He says, a mislabeled item is worse than an unlabeled one.
That's interesting.
Right. This seems weird. But if something's labeled wrong, you waste so much time looking in the wrong place.
Yeah, that's true. It's better to just have to search for something than to be totally misled, you know?
Exactly.
Okay, so we talked about all this physical clutter and how to organize it.
Yeah.
But what about digital stuff? Like email. My inbox is a disaster zone.
Oh, I hear you. Levitin, he compares physical mail and email.
Okay.
Like mail used to come once a day, so you had time to deal with it.
Yeah.
But email, it's constant. It just keeps coming and coming, so it's hard to concentrate on anything. Makes it tough to do deep work, you know?
Totally. I feel like I'm always switching between tasks, like never focusing on one thing for long.
Yeah, our brains are stuck in this task switching mode, which is exhausting.
It really is. So what do we do? Should we just ditch email?
Well, not exactly, but we need to be more disciplined.
Okay.
Levitin suggests setting specific times to check email.
Okay.
So you're not constantly interrupting what you're doing.
That makes sense. But what about all those newsletters and promotional emails I signed up for?
Oh, yes. Filters are your friends. Oh, right.
Use them to automatically sort your email into different folders.
Okay, so the important stuff goes to one place and the rest can wait.
Right. And don't worry about being perfect.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Levitin calls it satisficing. Like, just choose the good enough option. Don't get bogged down trying to write the perfect email reply.
I love that. Sometimes done is better than perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially with email.
Okay, so we've done physical organization, we've done digital, but what about our social lives? Keeping up with friends, family, everyone. It feels like another organizational nightmare.
It can be. You know, Levitin, he goes into the whole evolutionary side of things. Like, our ancestors lived in these small groups where everyone knew each other.
Right.
But today, our social networks are huge.
And then there's social media. It's like a high school reunion that never ends.
Exactly.
How are we supposed to manage all these connections?
Well, Levitin has this idea, like, use contact files, but with more info. Like little mini dossiers for everyone.
Write down where you met, what you talked about, birthdays, their partner's name, anything helpful.
So it's like giving my brain a cheat sheet for socializing.
Yeah, exactly. It takes the pressure off trying to remember every detail.
Oh, no more awkward have we met before moments.
Right.
And Levitin also talks about the tickler. What's that?
Oh, it's just a calendar reminder to reach out to someone.
Oh.
You set it for every few months, and when it pops up, you send a quick text or email, you know, just to stay in touch.
I love that. It's like my calendar's telling me to be a good friend.
Exactly.
Speaking of friendship, Levitin also talks about intimacy, right?
Yeah.
Like the importance of it in our culture.
Yeah, he defines it as letting someone share our private stuff, our thoughts and feelings.
Okay.
Like giving them access to that part of ourselves.
So it's more than just remembering birthdays or sending holiday cards. It's about being real with people, letting them see who we really are.
Yeah, exactly. And that takes effort. Like you got to choose to be present and engage with people even when you're busy.
Right. Okay, so much to think about here. But before we move on, let's talk about decision making. How do our brains handle all the choices we have to make nowadays? It's overwhelming.
It is. Well, Levitin, he brings up this thing called cognitive illusions.
What are those?
They're like mental shortcuts our brain takes to simplify things,
Okay.
especially when there's too much information.
So our brains are trying to be efficient, but they can get tricked.
Yeah, sometimes these shortcuts lead us to make bad decisions.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Like think about online dating. You see all these profiles with perfect photos and witty bios.
Right.
It's easy to judge based on that, even though it might not be the whole picture.
Yeah. It's like we're trying to use our caveman brains for a 21st century dating app.
Exactly.
So how do we avoid these illusions? Can we outsmart our own brains?
Well, Levitin suggests satisficing.
Okay, we talked about that with email.
Right. It's about picking something that's good enough instead of obsessing over the perfect choice.
So it's about making a decision and moving on.
Yeah, it's recognizing that there isn't always one right answer.
Okay, so it's about being informed but not getting stuck in analysis paralysis.
Exactly.
That makes sense, whether it's picking a restaurant or a career path.
Right.
Are there any other decision-making traps we should know about?
Well, Levitin also talks about framing. It's how information is presented. It can really influence our choices, even if the facts are the same.
Oh, interesting. Give me an example.
Sure. Imagine a doctor talking about a treatment. They could say, this treatment has a 90% success rate.
Okay.
Or they could say, there's a 10% chance it will fail.
Right. Same information, different feeling.
Exactly.
It shows how powerful framing can be.
Yeah, it's like marketing, but for your own mind.
Whoa. So we have to be aware of how information is presented to us.
Yeah.
What else should we watch out for?
Levitin talks about the fundamental attribution error. It's our tendency to overestimate personality and underestimate the situation when we're judging people.
So, like, we jump to conclusions about someone's character instead of thinking about what they might be going through.
Yeah. Levitin uses this experiment as an example. Students were randomly chosen to be questioners or contestants in a quiz game.
Okay.
The questioners, of course, seemed more knowledgeable because they were asking questions they knew the answers to.
Right.
But even when people were told it was random, they still thought the questioners were smarter.
Really? Just because they were asking the questions?
Yeah, it's the fundamental attribution error.
That's so interesting. So even when we know the context, we still judge people based on limited information.
Mm-hmm.
How do we avoid doing that?
Well, it takes effort to consider the whole situation, you know?
Right.
Not just assume someone's behavior reflects their personality.
Give them the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got cognitive illusions, framing, the fundamental attribution error. Anything else?
Levitin mentions outcome bias.
What's that?
It's judging a decision based on the outcome. Like, if it turns out well, we think it was a good decision, even if it wasn't.
So a lucky guess could look like a brilliant move if it works out.
Exactly. It's like our brains are always searching for patterns, even if they don't really exist.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes those patterns are real and helpful, right?
Oh, absolutely. But sometimes they lead to bias. We got to be aware of it.
So question our assumptions. Got it.
Yeah. And, what about those times when we cling to a belief even when there's evidence against it?
Oh, I do that all the time.
Right. That's belief perseverance, another brain quirk. Levitin describes this experiment where people were given false feedback about how attractive they were.
Okay.
Even after they were told the feedback was fake, they still kind of believed it.
It's like we don't want to let go of our beliefs, even if they're wrong.
Exactly. But on a more positive note, Levitin offers strategies for work and time management, too.
Oh, good. Tell me more.
He talks about how our brains handle planning versus actually doing stuff. He uses this analogy of a boss and a worker mindset.
Yeah.
The boss plans everything, sets deadlines, gets resources. Then the worker actually does the tasks.
I like that. So if I'm writing a report, my boss brain does the research and outlines it, and my worker brain actually writes it.
Exactly. The problem is we try to be both at the same time.
Right. And that's where multitasking comes in. Is that a bad thing?
Well, Levitin says multitasking makes us less efficient. We make more mistakes, and it takes more mental energy.
Really? I always thought I got more done when I multitask.
I know it feels that way, but it's like running 2 programs on a computer at once. It's going to slow down.
Makes sense. So focus on one thing at a time.
Yeah. Work with your brain, not against it.
Got it. So no more checking email while I'm writing that report?
Exactly. And here's another interesting thing. Our brains naturally break information into chunks.
Like scenes in a movie.
Yeah. We can use that when we're managing our time.
Oh, I see. So instead of jumping between random tasks, I can group similar ones together.
Exactly. It keeps your brain focused on one type of thing.
Okay, I'm sold on single tasking. Let's talk more about taming email. I'm ready to take control of my inbox.
All right. Levitin suggests those filters and folders we talked about, setting specific times for email, and most importantly, not checking it constantly.
Okay, we talked about the filters and set times. But how do I resist that urge to check all the time?
It takes practice. Turn off those notifications, those little red dots that make you want to click.
Yes, they're so tempting.
And then, maybe check email twice a day, and that's it.
Okay, I can try that. So it's about taking control, not letting email control me.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual stuff. Levitin also talks about how organizations are structured.
Like companies.
Yeah. He compares flat hierarchies to vertical ones.
So like a traditional company with a boss at the top versus a more team-based approach.
Yeah. He says vertical structures are needed in high-risk industries.
Oh, like a nuclear power plant or something.
Exactly. Where everything needs to be super precise.
But for more creative fields, a flatter structure might be better.
Yeah. More flexibility, faster decisions, more innovation.
Interesting. Levitin even brings up this idea of mission command.
Oh, yeah. It's like a decentralized style of leadership.
Yeah.
Where people have more freedom to make decisions.
He'd use examples from the military, right? Where things change so fast that you need to be able to adapt quickly.
Exactly. It's about trusting people to use their expertise and make the right call in the moment.
I see how that could be really effective. But delegation can be tough. How do we know when to delegate and when to do it ourselves?
Levitin says to think about time, expertise, and cost. Sometimes it's just faster to do it yourself,
Right.
but other times you need to delegate to free up your time for more important stuff.
Finding that balance.
Exactly. And we can't forget about shadow work.
What's that?
It's all those little things that need to happen, but no one's specifically assigned to do them.
Oh, I see. Like setting up meetings, ordering supplies, fixing tech problems, all those little things that could really mess things up if they're not done.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that everyone's work is important, even if it's not always visible.
That's true. Okay, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about data. We're creating and saving so much data these days. How do we keep it organized?
Levitin really stresses backing up your data. Disk failures happen, file formats become outdated. You got to be prepared.
So those external hard drives aren't as reliable as we think.
Not always. You need multiple backups, maybe even in different locations.
Good point. I'm definitely going to be more careful about backing up my stuff. But speaking of information, there's so much of it coming at us all the time. How do we even make sense of it all?
That's where information literacy comes in. You need to be able to evaluate what you see and hear.
Especially with all the fake news and stuff online.
Exactly. Levitin talks about selective windowing.
What's that?
It's like presenting information in a misleading way by focusing on certain things and ignoring others.
Oh, like those infomercials for miracle cures that only use testimonials and ignore actual science.
Exactly. They show you what they want you to see. We got to be critical and look for the whole picture.
Right. Don't just believe everything you see. What else should we look out for?
Remember, correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other.
Like people who eat ice cream are more likely to get sunburned.
Right. It doesn't mean ice cream causes sunburns.
Okay, I get it. There could be another factor, like summertime, that's causing both.
Exactly. Levitin uses the example of smoking and lung cancer. They're correlated, but it took years of research to prove that smoking actually causes cancer.
So we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions.
Right, and that's why critical thinking is so important. Levitin talks about control conditions in experiments.
Okay.
Like, if you're testing a new drug, you need a group that doesn't get the drug to compare it to.
Otherwise, you wouldn't know if the drug was really working or if it was just a placebo effect.
Right, you need that baseline.
Makes sense. I'm feeling more informed already. What else can help us be more critical thinkers?
Levitin mentions James Randi, a magician who offered $1 million to anyone who could prove they had paranormal abilities.
Wow. Did anyone ever win?
Nope. It just shows that we need to be skeptical, especially about things that seem too good to be true.
Be skeptical, but not cynical.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, being open to new ideas, but demanding evidence.
Right. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence.
Yeah. And honestly, all this critical thinking can be tiring.
I know, right?
It's about finding that sweet spot, being skeptical but also open-minded.
Okay, well, we've covered so much. From index cards to cognitive illusions to paranormal investigations. What are Levitin's final thoughts about having an organized mind?
He ends by talking about serendipity.
Like happy accidents.
Yeah. He compares searching online to browsing a physical library. Online, you find exactly what you're looking for. But in a library, you might stumble upon something totally unexpected.
Right. You could discover a new author or a topic you never even knew you were interested in.
Exactly. That's the magic of serendipity. And that's what an organized mind is all about. It's not just about being neat and tidy. It's about creating space for those unexpected discoveries.
So it's not just about efficiency and productivity.
No, it's about being more creative, exploring new ideas.
I love that. Okay, I think we've pretty much covered everything in the organized mind. We learned how our brains work, how to deal with information overload, and some practical ways to organize our lives. What are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, be kind to your brain. It's not designed for the world we live in today.
Right.
Don't stress if you feel overwhelmed or forget things.
Use those brain extenders, the calendars, the lists, the apps, anything that helps.
Exactly. And an organized mind isn't about being perfect. It's about finding what works for you.
Creating a life that feels good, productive, and meaningful.
Exactly.
What's one last piece of advice for our listeners?
The human brain is amazing. It's always adapting and changing.
So we can keep learning and growing.
Yeah.
And our brains will keep up.
Exactly. So keep exploring and don't be afraid to get a little messy sometimes.
That's a great reminder. Well, that's it for our deep dive into the world of the organized mind.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to check out Levitin's book, The Organized Mind, if you want to learn more.
Good stuff.
Stay curious, stay organized, and we'll see you next time. It's like we did a mental workout today.
But I like that even with all these strategies, we still need to be open to those unexpected insights.
Right. It's not about being perfectly in control. It's about having space for new ideas.
So how do we do that? Like, should we schedule serendipity time in our calendars?
Huh, maybe. But I think it's more about how we approach information.
Okay.
We don't always have to be super focused.
Right.
Sometimes it's good to explore, try different things, be curious.
Like, instead of just Googling for the answer, maybe go browse in a bookstore.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you find the best stuff when you're not even looking for it. It's like the difference between reading a textbook and getting lost in a good novel.
Yes, that's a great analogy.
So it's this balance, right, between focusing and exploring. That's what makes an organized mind powerful.
Exactly. It's about having the freedom to be creative, to be open to new things.
I love that. Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything about the organized mind.
I think so.
We learned how our brains work, how to deal with all this information, and some practical tips for getting organized. What are the big takeaways for our listeners?
Well, be nice to your brain. It's doing its best.
Right. Don't get discouraged if you feel overwhelmed.
Use those tools we talked about. Calendars, lists, apps, anything that helps.
And an organized mind isn't about perfection. It's about finding what works for you.
Yes. It's about creating a life that you enjoy. Productive, but also fulfilling.
Perfectly said. Any last words of wisdom before we wrap up?
Remember, the human brain is incredible. It's always learning and adapting.
So we can keep growing and changing.
Yeah, so keep learning, keep exploring, and push yourself to see what your mind can do.
That's great advice. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the organized mind.
It was fun.
Don't forget to check out Levitin's book if you want to learn more. Stay curious, stay organized, and we'll see you next time.